So we're so glad to have you. I'm Melissa Giroux. I'm a co-founder of Embrace Race. And I am also, since we embrace race, we start off with our how we identify. And I am multiracial, Black, white. And I'm here with.
I'm Andrew Grant Thomas. I identify as Black or African American. I'm also a co-founder. And I see a question about not seeing the globe. Hopefully, at the bottom of your screen. Oh, I'm sorry. That was
earlier.
Melissa who put that in
I
earlier.
didn't see it.
We aim to be responsive, folks.
Thanks, honey.
Sure.
Mhm.
So we're really glad to be joined by the guests, be talking about the topic that we'll be talking about. Let me give you a little bit, let me situate this conversation because it's a little bit different than what typically, the conversation we typically host. We embrace race, as many of you know, but some of you may be new to us. We are a community. We are trying to bring resources and community to parents and guardians and teachers and grandparents and aunties, uncles, mentors, all the adults in the lives of children who collectively play a role in shaping, uh, obviously a very important role in shaping how children think about race, act on race, and so on. We talk about supporting adults to in turn nurture children who are thoughtful, informed, and brave about race. The almost all of our webinars are typically ones in which we're trying to, bring forward amazing experts with amazing experiences who have insights and recommendations, information to help us do that work. Today is actually a little bit different in that while the guests are as amazing as ever, in this time we're actually looking for information from you because what we're trying to do is um, focus in on younger children and on Black and Indigenous children, right? And on the needs of the adults in the lives of those children. So early childhood, Black and Indigenous children and children of color. And the question is, among the educators, right, who work with that population of children, what do they need to do this work? So it's a subset, right, of the overall child population and the population of adult caregivers who work with those children. On Monday, we had a conversation that focused in on parents and guardians in particular. Today, it's around educators, and we have two amazing guests who will help us with that work.
But before we do that, we would like to start off with a couple poll questions, a few poll questions. We asked some versions of some of these on Monday if you came, but the audience is a bit different this time. So we'd like to start with the first poll question, if it's ready, Jose. And it is. What role or roles do you bring to this conversation about early childhood education? Check all that apply. I'm an early childhood educator. I'm a non-early childhood educator. I'm a parent, caregiver, abuela, tia, someone taking care of kids, or other. You can vote now and we'll find out soon how you answered. It's saying you can only click one. Okay. Sorry about that.
Maybe so whichever is the primary hat that you're wearing in this conversation.
Okay.
So Jose is doubtless waiting for to get as many responses as possible. And when you think it appropriate, just let us know what those results are.
And here they come. And there it is. Mostly early childhood educators, 40%, other teachers, 18%, parents, 12%, and other 30%. So if you want to later on expound on the other, what other you are in the chat, that would be great.
And of course, we appreciate that you weren't able to indicate when you wore multiple hats. I'm sure many of you do. We understand.
Right. And we have another question here. Another poll coming up. Jose Useche is amazing, and he's behind the scenes here.
And yes, I see a question from Karen about that librarians would usually call ourselves educators, which we agree. Certainly, a librarian is an educator.
How often do you explicitly talk to the young children in your life about race? This is answer with, you give one answer, multiple times a week, maybe more, weekly, more or less, monthly, more or less, or rarely. And we're hearing from folks in the chat about what their other is. Mentor, love it. Grandmother.
A student. Librarians, principal, teacher, that's certainly educator. Yep. Yeah. Several grandparents in the mix, which is great.
Support family, support person for family. Okay. Should we take a guess on this one?
Last time we had never as a possibility, and there were certainly some of those.
Okay, so multiple times 13%, weekly 32, so mostly weekly. Wow.
Well, it looks like a good mix of weekly, monthly, and rarely are all pretty well represented. Not so many people, about 1 in 8, say multiple times a week or more.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay.
And we have one more.
One more. Okay. What barriers do you face in talking to children about race? Hopefully you can check all that apply, but if you can't, check the one that's comes to mind first. They are too young, 0 to 4 years. They are too young, 5 to 8 years. They haven't asked any questions yet. I don't know what to say other.
And again,
so it could be that you don't face these barriers.
Well, and it may be, of course, that you do speak. Most of you did in some way. You did speak about race with children, and still you may feel some hesitation, some obstacle, some barrier, and we're wondering what those are, if you feel them at all.
Right. Hello from Seattle. I teach elementary. Okay. Jose, drum roll. Okay. So the other, we really need to know more about that other.
Some multiple answers to this one, but not so many people saying that the age of the children is an obstacle in itself, but certainly not knowing what to say and the children not having broached the subject yet are real issues. And a lot of you, half of you, said there was some other reason. If you'd like to put what those other reasons might be in the chat, we'll get back to them in just a moment.
We're hearing that the barriers parents sometimes, other girls. My daughter says I talked about it too much and doesn't want to hear it. We totally get that. Comes in phases, doesn't it? Okay,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. We're really excited about our 2 guests tonight who can come on. Lisa Gordon, hello, Lisa, and Debbie Lee Keenan.
Hey, Debbie.
We're excited to have you on. Let me just say a little bit about Lisa. She's both of these educators have just such impressive and long bios that I'm just going to read a little bit, and you're going to have to look them up, and we have plenty of resources, or they will give us plenty that you'll be able to follow your lead, because there's much more about them and what they do that'll be helpful to you. So Lisa Gordon has worked in early childhood education for the past 25 years, designing and delivering professional development, training, technical assistance, and programs at both the state and federal levels that facilitate the well-being of children and families. She is a co-founder of Colorful World, a women-owned diversity educational consulting firm whose mission is to facilitate the creation of inclusive learning environments that empower all children and families to succeed. Lisa is currently a partner with the Children's Equity Project at Arizona State University that works at the intersection of research to policy and practice to close opportunity gaps and ensure that all children, regardless of race, ethnicity, income, home language, or ability, reach their full potential. And there's so much more, including Bank Street and Head Start and on and on. Lots of very rich experience. Lisa lives in Reston, Virginia with her husband and 2 sons. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank
Glad
you.
to have you. And then Debbie Lee Keenan is a longtime social justice educator, early childhood consultant and lecturer and author. She has been in the field of early education for over 48 years. I don't believe that. She is a former preschool, special education, and elementary school teacher. She has been a member of the early childhood faculty at Tufts University, at Lesley University, and the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, which is around the corner from us here. Her most recent co-authored books include Leading Anti-Bias Early Childhood Programs, A Guide for Change, which she co-wrote with Louise Jermond Sparks and John Nemo. And also another one is From Survive to Thrive, Leading an Early Childhood Program. She's a member of a multiracial family and an active grandmother. Welcome, Debbie. So I want to start where we always start with Embrace Race, about folks' sort of personal investment in this work. So let me start with you, Lisa. Wondering, what we need to know about you to know why, joy, resilience, and children of color in Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latino, multiracial children is something that's important to you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Melissa and Andrew, and welcome everybody. So excited to be a part of this dialogue tonight. Really, I think I have to start at the beginning, my own childhood, and really this direct correlation to the nourishment, the support, and encouragement of my own resilience and joy that I received as a child from my own family, extended family, and community, and all the relationships that were really cultivated within that circle. My parents were social justice advocates and made every opportunity to really ensure that my brothers and I had a real strong sense of who we were and who we are culturally, that really helped to dispel any of the deficit narratives or messages that may have told us otherwise, right? And this was really critical. I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts. And many of you on the call know Massachusetts, but it was a predominantly white community. There was our church, our family members that really provided those strong role models for us. Many of my family members and role models were the first in their prospective profession, right? First African-American nursing, visiting nurses. My dad was an administrator and first Black administrator in 3 different communities throughout New England. So there was always that sense of role model and relationship there. But that relationship extended beyond my immediate family, right, to what we call extended family. And extended family were people from different backgrounds who worked alongside my parents to be social activists, for fair housing, to bridge greater understanding and dialogue amongst diverse groups. And so people in my circle weren't spectators. They were activists, and they all participated in bridging differences. So that's, I think, the first thing. And the second thing I would say is that because of that experience, I understood the importance of social emotional development and learning, and really that's really about, like, culture is totally at the center of that. And part of that is really that capacity of knowing, of kind of having that self-knowledge, knowing one's place in the world, and our own cultural identity. And as I moved into the professional world and started to see the absence of that in learning environments for children, I could not help but say, got to do something about this. And that's really what really started my part of advocacy, right, and investment, was that people needed to understand that culture is at the core, that culture is what children know and are is related to their culture. They are that is the rules that shape their relationships. And so knowing that, that was really where my advocacy really started, and in really launching Colorful World as a consulting business to try to help educators understand that.
Right.
In 1995, a lot of people didn't get it. They were like,
yeah.
diversity, multiculturalism, why? Why should we really care? And so that was really, I think, part of the grounding for me. I would say those two things about what you might want to know.
Mm-hmm. That's really, I was doing a lot of mm-hmming there.
Mhm.
Yeah. Debbie, what about you? What is your, why do you do what you do? It's a personal investment.
Yes, of course, it's both personal and professional.
Mhm.
I feel I've come to my anti-bias, anti-racist work really from my professional experience as an educator, but also my personal experience as a third generation Chinese American, originally from New York City. So my last name, Lee Keenan, I'm the Lee. Keenan was my husband's name. He's Irish American, so we put our names together. We have 2 adult biracial children, and then we have 3 multiracial granddaughters who also have some Latinx and Indian heritage as part of their family. So personally, looking for communities that would support my family when I was a parent was a big part of influencing who I was. But again, my own experience growing up as a third generation Chinese American, I didn't see myself in the tools of school always. And I remember clearly, lived in New York City, but then my parents moved to New Jersey, supposedly for a better education. And the experience that stands out in my mind is when the first day we were on the playground, it was in 3rd grade, and a child came up to me and said, "Last year we had a Mexican. What do we have this year?"
Wow.
No one said anything. Not any of the children, not any of the teachers, not any of the playground monitors. And everyone just stared. And I think it's still a very powerful moment to me when I remember thinking, I'm going to be a teacher when I grow up, and I'm not going to let anyone feel the way I felt at that moment. So fast forward some 60 years, I am actually part of 3 generations of teachers. My mom was a public school teacher in New York City, and my daughter is a teacher now also. And we just vowed that that would be a part of our experience. So there's been this intersection of both my personal and professional life. I've been from being a Head Start teacher, an early childhood teacher, preschool teacher, elementary teacher, special ed teacher, had the opportunity to be director at a lab school at Tufts University, the Elliott Pearson Children's School, where I helped lead that program to become a Center for Anti-Bias Education and becoming higher education faculty. But all of that has always kind of centered my focus. My personal experience really centered my professional experience on the ideas of inclusion, equity, and social justice. So for me, it's both professional and very personal.
Just knowing from the start, wow, there's a lot missing here, and the interesting experience of some people don't know it's even missing, right? Thank you for that.
Yeah, so Debbie, that playground experience, right? So that's just not to say unimportant, but obviously an instance of when it's not working well. And Lisa, you gave just some great, you were nurtured, right? You talk about the family, the extended family, the role models, the activists. You talk about the importance of, cultural identity. And so, you and your brothers, I think you said brothers, right? Were nurtured.
Yeah, brothers, 2 brothers.
2 brothers. And I'm wondering, when you think back about, I find myself wondering, what would, had we known you then, right? Had we known the young Lisa, right? Sort of in the bosom of this incredibly nurturing extended family and network, what would we have seen that would have shown us what it looks like for a young girl of color, African-American girl, to be nurtured? What would you have seen that would have let us know this is going well?
Yeah.
And of course, Debbie will come to you, whether it's with respect to you or, all the children, families, young people, especially of color.
That's a great question, Andrew, because, as I thought about that and think about that, because of all that nurturing, I exhibited, and that Lisa that you would have met, uh, had a uninhibited, enthusiastic wonder and curiosity about my world, about the world. I would dare I had no hesitation to take risks, to try something new, right? To solve problems within the community of, of other, my peers, and adults who I knew I could use as, kind of secure basis to be able to support my inquiry. That's what you would have seen from that Lisa. There were, whenever there were messages that may have been contrary to what I was nurtured and the way I was nurtured, I would go back to my family and ask that question. And they would help me make sense of it and understand. But again, really developing my healthy sense of self in my culture, who I was culturally. And so that didn't deter my curiosity. I think what unfortunately you see today is kind of that opposite, where children's curiosity can be shut down by negative stereotypes, microaggressions, or something we call the stereotype threat. Where children start to listen to messages and attitudes about them and internalize it and begin to feel a certain way about those negative messages. Other children chime in on those negative messages. We see a lot of that with boys in particular. I do a lot on, kind of looking at the school readiness and success of boys of color. And we see that boys often get this label just because of who they are, their sense of energy, curiosity, right? I just mentioned curiosity, and seeing that as a negative, where adults might want to shut down that energy. And so that stereotype threat just zaps that curiosity when it is innately a piece of who we are. So that's one thing that I see. And I love, there's a quote that Zaretta Hammond has, and I don't know if you have, those of you on the who are participating have read Culturally Responsive Practice and The Brain, but it really sets in motion this whole notion of strong sense of self and relationship, and how that ties to brain development and learning. And it really says that the brain feels safest and relaxed when we are connected to others who we trust to treat us well. And when we're in those trusting relationships, we can explore the innate curiosity that children have. The innate curiosity that Lisa had, that I had, could be explored. Obviously later in life, I've had experiences that may have shook that. But because of the nature and the foundation of what I had, I could always come and walk away from that. The only other thing I guess I would just add to that is this sense of sort of, I guess I would say, psychological and physical safety, to really bring myself into my learning environment. Like I could come to my classroom, I could come to school and not be inhibited or ashamed of who I was because of the nurturing. But that always isn't the case for children, right? We know that children should be able to bring their culture, their language, their ways of being and knowing into the classroom. It should be celebrated, and other children celebrate as well. But we know that doesn't happen. I don't know if I have a quick moment of a story, because I know we need time to keep moving, but just a quick explanation of that. In a classroom, I was a literacy coach in this classroom, and a young girl, a family had adopted a young girl. She spoke Mandarin, and she would come into this classroom and cry every day. Every day she cried. And the teachers tried to console her. The children in the classroom tried to friend her, and she just cried. And at the time I said, I have, because of my company, I had all these multicultural, diverse resources. And I was like, oh, I have some things in Mandarin. I have some music. I've got some books. I've got some things. So I brought that in. And Christina just lit up. It wasn't the fact that it was separation from her families, which the teacher thought. It was the lack of continuity from what she knew. Like, her language was not even validated. And so the crying was out of isolation. And when that was brought in, she just lit up. Needless to say, within about a week, she was already speaking English as well as Mandarin. But it's just an example of when the validation happens, how powerful that is to that psychological and physical safety to bring our whole selves and children right into the environment.
Right.
Lisa, that's wonderful. I mean, and so what I'm hearing is, that kind of safety, that validation, that embrace of who you are culturally and otherwise, that the child who feels that is also willing to express that, right? To bring that part of himself, herself, themselves to the classroom, to interactions with not only peers, but adults. I love the vibe about sort of adventurousness, right? Adventurousness, about sort of respectful curiosity. Debbie, I want to come to you and thinking about you're having in effect sort of gotten your mission call maybe on that playground and doubtless around other aligned incidents. So 60 years later, as you say, lots of engagement with families and kids trying to speak up, right? Those adults who didn't speak up, you're going to speak up and do much more. And in those classrooms then, or when you go into a classroom now or school, what catches your eye that makes you say something good is happening here?
Right. So I think of those 4 anti-bias goals, and I'm looking for that with the children. How do they express their positive social identities, feeling good about who they are, the color of their skin, the language they speak, the culture, their food, their rituals, and of course, their families. So I want to see that. I also want to see them being comfortable to negotiate, to initiate with people who are different than them, people of different color, people have different ways of being. Do they feel comfortable? Do they have that, as Lisa said, the curiosity and the are willing to take risks in doing that? And I also really want to see children understanding what unfairness is, what it looks like, and what they can do about it. And particularly for our Black and Indigenous and children of color, are they able to stand up for themselves, to speak up for themselves when people say unkind or unfair things about them? As a child, that was hard for me. I didn't have all of the, well, of course, my family loved me. I've always felt that, but I didn't feel that in school a lot of the time. I remember even when I actually probably there were periods of time where I didn't even see myself as being Chinese. As a matter of fact, if I saw someone else who was Chinese, I turned away because I saw myself as white. I didn't see myself as who I was. So it's the opposite of that, of what I'm looking for when I see children of color who feel really good about themselves. The piece, so those, some of you I'm sure on the chat are familiar with these ideas of these goals, but that's one way to look for those, identity, feeling good about who you are in your family, right? Diversity, feeling able to interact and understand people who are different than you. The unfairness one would be the third goal around justice, right? What's unfairness, what it looks like, that unfairness hurts. And that fourth goal, of course, is about action and empowerment. And some people think action is a lot, activism, that is part of that, standing up and speaking up. But I also see it as empowerment, again, particularly for people who are targeted, who have been targeted, that they gain those skills, how to speak up for themselves. And we as adults can give them those tools. And I think that is the role of educators and families, to help provide our children with tools to learn how to stand up for themselves.
Right.
Yes,
And I hear that a lot in Lisa's story, right, of being raised by parents who were activists, who didn't think the world as it was had to be, right, that they thought they could put effort in and change it, and felt powerful in that way. And that's really it's a really strong message. And I know that a lot of, and Andrew and I come from immigrant families where the message was different. I mean, yours, maybe not, I'll speak for mine. That the message was sort of like assimilate, and we're lucky to be here. We have to sort of move ahead here and learn all the rules. And so you really do, there isn't the support to sort of stand out really in any way, or to embrace your culture. I'm sure, Debbie, all of your stories, that there were people thinking about, as I was, incidents on the playground, like I'm sure on this call, there were a lot of people just who went back, to those moments of, be ashamed of who you are. Don't bring that here, so very powerful story. So I wonder, and ideas, I wonder about, you were talking, Debbie, about those sort of 4 goals of anti-bias education. And I wonder what you talked about, sort of identity, bringing your whole self, diversity, kind of being able to interact well with others and appreciating others, having a sense of fairness, what's fair, what's unfair, and then action, being able to take action around those things. I wonder if you're looking for those things, whether, and maybe I can start with Debbie this time. I'm wondering what the challenges are for early ed teachers of reaching those goals, of creating those circumstances where kids can thrive, the biggest challenges.
And Debbie, just before you answer, I want to encourage folks who are listening to offer one of your big challenges, especially if you're an educator, but we're understanding educator very broadly. So, as someone who may be trying to support, in the ways that we're talking about, young children of color and Black and Indigenous children, one of the big premises of Embrace Race is that there are a great many people, an increasing number, we think, who are actually trying to do that, but may not know how, or this is a question: what are the challenges to doing that work? Please put in the chat, and we'll take a look when some folks have done that. Debbie, what do you think?
So I think the first thing, of course, is creating these environments where every child is being seen, right? It's your materials, your books, your toys. But I would say it goes way beyond the environment. I mean, you need that, but to go beyond that environment, do your teachers see you? Do they see you for who you are, your culture, your language, the things we're talking, your social identities? And where do we get our social identities and our culture and our language? It's from our home. So that connection of that concept of funds of knowledge, that every child comes to school with strengths, with dispositions, with skills and knowledge that they've learned from their families. And do we as educators appreciate that? That's where often the disconnect can come from. And I think that when teachers do use this home language, these funds of knowledge, and incorporate that in their classrooms intentionally and strategically, children will feel comfortable, will gain that confidence, will be able to take risks, and obviously be able to learn. So I think that idea of feeling comfortable with embracing and working with families, learning from and with families, and bringing that into classroom is key. The second point I'll bring up is, though, I think it's more than just activities. Many people think, well, I got to do anti-bias, anti-racist education. I'm going to get this book and do these curriculum things. And if I do all this, I've done it. Mm-hmm. I think anti-racist work is way more than just curriculum activities. It takes careful self-reflection, careful education, and really understanding your own social identities and biases. I was glad we started introducing ourselves, who we are, with that, because I like to say we carry our ghosts with us on our shoulders. And once we understand a little bit more about how our backgrounds and our social identities and our biases, we all have them, influence who we are as educators, then we can better really meet the needs of our children and families. And often when teachers are of a different social identity than the children they're serving, right, and families that they're serving, there's even more disequilibrium. But again, I guess I'll say that disequilibrium, I see that as a good thing. We have to embrace complexity, disequilibrium, conflict, tension, because that's when real growth happens. So one is that there's going to be this disconnect. There will be things we don't know. And I would urge, I think educators sometimes have a hard time with that, feeling comfortable, embracing this complexity and seeing it as an opportunity for growth. So those are some first things that come to mind for me when thinking about, how do we support and nurture and children of color in particular.
Mm-hmm. Lisa, I want to come to you in just 1 second. Just want to highlight a couple of the responses we're getting. Perhaps not surprisingly, we're getting responses that, in a sense, locate the challenges both in families, in educators, and even in children. Mm-hmm. So, for example, we have staff who have their own biases and or don't think it's an issue, right? I think Debbie, you alluded to this to some degree. You have some responses from educators saying that families present all kinds of obstacles themselves.
Especially sitting next to their kids online
sitting next
right
to their
now.
kids, the biases the educators feel the families are sort of promulgating in the children. Lack of diversity. We have one saying that some of the children themselves don't recognize differences, or at least don't express any recognition of those differences. So that can be a challenge to work with. And then I'll just mention one more. Someone who works in a school, I'm not quite finding it, but I think she said that there were 40 different sort of cultures. There's so much
different languages spoken,
diversity that she wondered, how do you highlight culture when there's such a diversity of culture? Mm-hmm. Lisa, please, your thoughts.
Yeah, those are great comments. Where to begin, and it's interesting because Debbie and I are both parallel in terms of where we think the issue is in terms of raising an awareness and confronting our own biases, right? And someone had said that there's an issue where staff or individuals don't even think they have bias. That's the vulnerability where we need to be. And Debbie said it, and it's true. It's not only bias of children who are not of the same race. Gender bias is huge. There was an African-American teacher who was in a professional learning opportunity around equity. And she said, I don't know why we're here. You're kind of preaching to the choir. Mm. But as she stepped back, she realized that she had some issues with the socioeconomic class of the children that she worked with, and had issues about these children. And she kept making comments about these children in this neighborhood. And she realized herself, wow, I have a bias, and never realized it. It totally changed her dynamics. It's the first step to really bring about that change. And Debbie spoke about that vulnerability that we need to have to be able to, and the willingness to be able to start here. be able to see the strength of our children and families. And the other thing someone had commented about, so many different languages and so many different um, representations of ethnicities and cultures in a classroom. One thing that I saw that was beautifully done in a classroom, and Debbie talked about this, like how you build a sense of community, was there. The teacher asked, the kids were really interested in superheroes. What children aren't, right? So they started to talk about superheroes. They dug and dived into the topic, and then she asked each child to find a superhero in their community, in the neighborhood. And she gave families that didn't have a camera at the time, because I'm dating myself, right? some disposable cameras, but they took pictures. And so they brought in, and they had a heroes wall, and it had heroes. They were Latino heroes. They were African-American. They were Asian Pacific Islander. They were of diverse backgrounds, socio classes. There were cafeteria workers and custodians, and they were in different languages that they would talk about these individuals that were heroes. And for those children, they could all see the diversity, right, and the unique ways of being and knowing that came about from all these people that might look different, but inside they were heroes. So there was that commonality of and a sense of community that was built. I think that's just a wonderful way when you can start to have children bring in pieces of lived experience into the community, talk about it and discuss it, and have visual representation for them to be able to celebrate one another. The other thing I think I would just say is, as people are saying, that it's not an easy task, right? To enter into the vulnerable space of what we don't know, of really being that which we hope to see, right? But it really requires that we really begin to be willing to take that step, that we are willing to bring about change. And the change really happens within what I like to kind of elevate is our dispositions, right? Because you can change your attitudes and your feelings about stuff, but the dispositions is our motivations, it's our behaviors, that when we know something and we learn something new, we apply it. So as we're doing the hard work of examining and confronting our biases, we recognize that we have a sense of agency and responsibility, right, in this change process, to be advocates for change for our children and families. It means that we, create learning environments that nurture our children, their resilience, their joy, and they're being recognized and validated, and validating others' humanities. And dispositions are so key, because like I said, you can change your attitudes on how you feel about something, but you cannot really realize true change until our actions and our behaviors change. So, we often talk about like this culturally responsive practice, and Debbie talked about, it's not just activities, right? So culturally responsive practice is really about validating and affirming children's culture and using it to and through, right? And using their strengths, their funds of knowledge, as Debbie had pointed out, to make learning more meaningful. But it's also about caring, right? It's a caring for, not just about of children of color, but about their families, about their personal well-being. So there's a sense of action and empathy and commitment that comes with that. And that really means that we need to be advocates, that we advocate on their behalf, that we challenge systems of oppression, that we challenge negative narrative, deficit narrative. We challenge systems that might not be equitable. We speak up. We continually reflect on ways that our own actions or inactions might perpetuate these inequities or help eliminate them.
Right.
And
So,
challenge them. And that's really what it takes to be sort of an advocate for change.
right. So Lisa, we want to come to this question then of how we, and we literally mean we, embrace race, and certainly others. And I think there are an increasing number of groups, and there are certainly people who are listening right now who are wondering, let's say administrators, right, in schools, and are wondering, how do we support teachers to do that, and educators more broadly to do that work? And Debbie, I want to come to you. You outlined some incredibly important challenges, wondering how to do that. And Lisa, I want to come back to you after that, because these issues, and at the risk of being reductive, I mean, disposition, huge one, caring, right? Even if we have the disposition, then what do we need to care? And then I'm thinking about tools, and you talk about validation, right? And of course, what people want to know, and many people who come to us and are generally sort of doing healthy inquiry into how they can do better, what they want to know is, okay, give me some tools, give me some resources, give me some community. I'm wondering, from both of you, how do we think about how we offer those things so they'll be helpful? Debbie.
Right, sure. So I think people, yes, we need the professional development, educators need that, and it's around anti-bias, anti-racist, relevant, and culturally sustaining pedagogy, but it's more than the theory. We need to see what it looks like, okay, on a daily basis. I'm fortunate right now in the middle of, I'll share a little bit, we're going to be creating actually a film about what anti-bias looks like in the classroom. And we've captured vignettes from different teachers actually doing it and reflecting on that process. And we hope to have that out next year. And we're going to just stream it for people to use, because that's the message I've been hearing. It's, we have the books, we have the articles, do the presentations, but people want to say, well, what does it look like? How do you respond to those questions that children ask? I mean, that's a big, how do you do it? What is it? So to see people doing it and how it's very matter of fact. Yes, there are these big pieces, but it's also daily little interactions, not ignoring when children ask a question. And even if we're uncomfortable, to just listen carefully and say, that's a good question. Let's get back to that. And again, empowering children to, if they're a target, how to speak up around what happened, that how they feel about that. And the other message I want to give is this idea of creating communities of practice, or professional learning communities. And what those are opportunities for early childhood educators to come together to share challenges, successes, dilemmas, problems of practice from the classroom, and to get support on about the process of teaching and learning for adults. So it's not just a one-stop thing. You do a workshop or someone comes in to give you support. Yes, all these things are important, but to have some ongoing, creating these communities of professional learning communities on a regular basis. And the other piece I wanted to share about communities of practice is that this is not a new phenomena. As a matter of fact, this type of learning, if you go back and look at it, has existed for a long time, as long as people have been learning and sharing experiences through storytelling. And that's a big part of course, of Indigenous and Black culture. So I think it's kind of ironic that we're talking about this today. I actually thought about that, that we're focusing on this, and that these communities of practice, which for some schools have been newer for, but really it's not a new idea. I guess that's a message to think about.
That is so powerful. I mean, it's a thing that we talk about a lot, about wanting to increase our capacity as parents, as grandparents, as teachers, to do this work. And it's almost like we've let someone else, in some cases, it's been professionalized as though we weren't the ones always doing it, and our families weren't the ones always doing it. So there's sort of a reclaiming of that I think is important.
quick
And we can
follow-up.
support each other. I think that's the key
We can
piece.
support each other.
And
Yeah.
quick follow-up and sort of clarification question, Debbie, you referred to this film, right? The film that you've been working on, it's coming out, you hope, I know, early next year. And these are going to be examples, right? What it looks like in practice, you said.
Yes.
So
Well,
you went.
you want me to share? We visited different classrooms, we've filmed in different classrooms, and we have reflections from teachers talking about it, both kind of the short term, what the teachable moments, as well as kind of the bigger pieces. So there've been films out there the films that are out there have been a little bit older, and a lot of them had more talking heads. As a matter of fact, myself and John, we're not even in the film because this is the stars of the film are the people, are the teachers and the children in the classroom, and how that happens. And we're fortunate that we had a grant for it, so we're hoping to just be able to disseminate it for everyone, and we'll let you know.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Debbie. Lisa.
I am so on my edge of my seat, Debbie, about this film, because I have to tell you. So in the work that we do, we always try to give educators, when we're doing professional learning experiences, whether they be communities of practice, which Debbie, you and I need to talk, because that's exactly it's communities of practice, right? Not once, drive-by kind of sessions. But there is the power of inquiry is great, right? That's what we really aspire to try to really help our children to grow to that deeper, higher order thinking. And so we show examples, and I was looking for an example one day of children of color engaging in emergent curriculum, right? Project-based learning, where inquiry was just a flow and a fresh. Couldn't find one. I could not find an example where people could see it. But what I saw were examples of the rote learning, the examples of really stringent, strict environments that are not allowing for play, that aren't child initiated when it comes to Black and Indigenous children and children of color. That environments become not teaching children to be independent learners, but to be dependent learners, dependent on the teacher having control. And I love that. Zaretta Hammond says that inquiry is the great cognitive equalizer. So we're talking about equity and talking about diverse experiences and trying to make that opportunity happen. That's what we're talking about. So I totally agree with that. The only other thing I wanted to add to the dialogue about, adding, and you think about communities of practice and the voices, like you say, coming together in dialogue, is also the voice of families. Sometimes we miss in the dialogue of trying to build our understanding, having a professional learning community or communities of practice with families. Bring them together, share their experiences, tell their stories about how they're experiencing early education. What has that been like for them? What is it like for now for their children? Come together to be authentic partners, right? Partners as co-educators, and together to do this work. Right now, we're asking families to do a whole lot. It's a heavy lift in this hybrid virtual learning environment with COVID. We're asking them to do a lot, but we need to come together and really bridge the gap.
You're giving us some great ideas here. We all have to talk, and we're getting great ideas in the chat too.
Yeah, just a very quick question on the communities of practice. In your combined experience, are you seeing, even if it's not in early childhood per se, have you seen examples of communities of practice that you think do it really well?
Yes, they're happening.
Absolutely.
Yes, definitely. All over the country. I know groups in Seattle, Boston, San Francisco. They're all over. We used to meet in person, a lot of these groups in early childhood. And sometimes I should mention, it really has to be dependent on the context. Some of them could be school-based or program-based. And sometimes they could be across schools and across roles. And I agree with having, I've been involved with communities of practice that include families and educators in the same group. Sometimes you want communities of practice that are like just for people of color, or, but sometimes they're mixed. It's a little bit like affinity groups, I think.
Yeah.
I think the other key piece of successful communities of practice that they use protocols to help structure the conversation. So it's not just sitting around and kind of shooting the breeze around, about serious stuff. But we've found that the use of structured conversation,
Yes.
different kinds of protocols, helps you slow down, really observe, really think, really analyze, rather than rush to like an answer. So you can, and it also, everyone's busy. When you have a community of practice, if it's an hour, 2-hour meeting or a 90-minute meeting, you want to use every moment and not, you have to figure out how to do that. So there are a lot of protocols that are out there that are very useful, very good tools. I think of the School Reform Initiative, making learning visible. There are a lot of different things.
Okay, this is great.
I would add to the IDEO Trust for Learning. We just did a whole communities of practice in the city of New Haven, which was communities, like in the community with families, teachers, social workers, Department of Health and Human Services folks. It was awesome. And again, Debbie, you're right with all the protocols, but around a topic of inquiry that they felt was important.
Well, we tried to incorporate some of the questions. We've got some questions of course, couldn't get to all the questions, but the conversation, and everything that people are sharing in the chat was just so fruitful and so generative. We hope to have more, and we're so appreciative of everyone who participated, and especially of you, Lisa and Debbie, for coming on and sharing your expertise with us tonight.
And for phenomenal work over
for all you've been doing.
Thank you so much.
For doing the work, for just doing the work. It's not
Thank
always my work.
We will be in touch.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
There are some of you that wanted the references that folks have been, that Lisa and Debbie have been making, and we'll send you, a transcript and the resources and all of that. So it won't go away. Don't worry.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you to our wonderful interpreters at Bancha Linguas.
Yeah.
And thank you,
Yes,
Jose.
thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate you all. Thank you.
you.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Stay safe.
Yeah, definitely stay safe. Be well with your families.
Bye.